Ladies and gentlemen, please silence your phones and hush your babies. The show is about to start.
I offer my personal welcome to this
Nemo
and Cole Conference
halftime
show.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are back. We are back. It is the first weekend in April, and we all know what that means. That means the General Conference of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is on. It's happening. It's the most exciting thing in Mormonism. We get to hear what the men who claim to speak for God are saying to all the members of the church, and that affects many of us in many different ways. This is my first General Conference, not as a member of the church or as an excommunicated member of the church, or however you want to describe it. This is my first time not being able to participate in the sustaining vote, as I understand it. So welcome, everyone. We got some people in the comments already saying hello, hello, hello. Undead Whitey says, be a footnote. Yeah, we'll get to that. Don't you worry. There's already been some quite iconic things said. And before I introduce my guest, and I'm sure you can all guess who it is, we're going to get right in with the data that you all want to know the sort of where we're at with, which is Jesus, Joe, or Russell. Who was quoted the most? (22-11). So Jesus on double the amount of mentions of Russell and Nelson. Joseph Smith with 2. Coming in quite strong for an early lead there, Jesus is. But it's an April conference. It's Easter time. It is to be expected. Jesus does quite well in these ones generally. So, yeah, there we are. That we will keep that tally throughout the sessions as we watch them, even late into the night for me. But I have a... See if I can make myself full screen. There we go. I have a packet of Jammy Dodgers. I have a jumbo pack, 16 biscuits. So I'm ready. I'm ready for anything. And so is my guest tonight. He is also ready for anything, aren't you, Peter?
Oh, yes, baby. I am here. I'm biscuitless because I'm trying to lose weight. Lynn and I were congratulating ourselves on both going to the corner shop without buying biscuits, which has been a big journey for us. So,
Okay.
yeah, enjoy your jammy Dodgers. I'll experience them vicariously.
Well, yes, I hope so. We are going to crack straight on with it because, there was a lot to dig into and not much time to dig into it. And Peter and I could both talk for a long time. So I want to eat tonight before the next session starts. Russell M. Nelson, straight away, is viewing from home. He's phoning it in. He's not in the conference center. We've seen that for the past few conferences now. Nothing new here. We'll see if he does turn up to any sessions. It would be a new thing for him to not turn up to any, but yeah, he's phoning it in, which means Dan Litchokes has been asked to conduct, and he's also the presiding officer in the building, as it were. He's presiding at the conference, but he can't quite bring himself to say that. That's not quite his place to say. We've got Kevin S. Hamilton making a show with the opening prayer, and then we had the sustaining of church officers. I mentioned that was my first time not being able to engage with the sustaining of church officers. So, yeah, we had quite a lot of changes, didn't we? We saw the Young Men's General Presidency released. We saw Teixeira released from the presidency of the 70, I believe. Let me just check.
So Teixeira is quite important to us because he was the Europe area president. He's from Portugal, who in 2010 challenged the Europe area to double sacrament attendance in the next decade, during which time it crashed.
Yes.
So he's got some significant local history around that.
And so Baxter, Bennett, Hamilton, Pino, and Zabelos were made emeritus, which means that the closing prayer was given by Zabelos, and that was his probably his final time in General Conference. He'll be made emeritus as of the summer of this year. They thanked the brethren and their families. Now, I'm trying to recall whether they've done that in recent conferences, whether that's a new thing that's just started happening. Either way, it's quite nice. I like the fact that they're thanking both the brethren and their families. I think that's a good thing. And then Kevin R. Duncan was brought onto the presidency of the 70 to replace Teixeira. Then we got some new GA 70s, who I tried desperately to write their names down. But Peter, I believe you have them. But they were Amos, Barcelos, Barlow, Cuvelier, Gisela, Evanson, Aya.
Barlow, yeah,
Yeah.
Siesta, something
Mhm.
Czechoslovakian or something. Evenson, Air, Ortega, Rowe, yeah, Liang Wu, Hall, Holmes, Lariat, I think, something like that, and Motsawagatola
Yeah,
from
we all struggle with that. Dan H. Oaks struggled with that one.
and Farias.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah. So, what do we know about their professions, Peter? What
Well,
before you
one
say
is
anything, put people in the chat. What sort of professions do you think these brand new General Authority 70s might have? What do we think their professional backgrounds might be? You know, we talk about this church because I did notice the names seem to be more diverse, which is good. We seem to be getting more diversity coming into
Yeah.
the GA70, just diversity in terms of, you know, their geographical location. They're probably not all from Utah by the sounds of some of their names.
Elder
So
Amos is black and he's from Louisiana, for example.
yeah, Sells saying they reckon they're lawyers. Dave Richards says big businessmen. Ruth Heath wonders if they're teachers, maybe builders or florists. Philip Blair says, are they sociologists, perhaps? Yeah, well,
Let's find out,
let's
shall
find
we?
out. Yeah.
Okay. One is a dentist.
Ooh.
One is works in health administration.
Okay.
So they usually have a couple of representatives of the health sector. One is an engineer.
Okay.
One seems to have mainly worked for seminaries and institutes. 3 are lawyers,
Hmm.
and 9 are Masters of Business Administration graduates who
9
run businesses.
MBAs.
9 MBAs, including 1 car salesman. Who is from Botswana. That was his
Okay.
particular speciality, but he's definitely in business. So yes, this is still a church run by business
Businessmen and
managers
lawyers
and lawyers
with
and a
the odd
few health
health professional.
professionals.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. Nothing in the arts, nothing in education, nothing in theology, nothing in history,
Nothing
nothing
in
in anything
tradesmanship.
relevant to running a religion at all
Yeah.
whatsoever. Of
Yes.
course.
Okay, right. So that's their backgrounds. I don't think we need to belabor
Yeah.
that point too much.
No.
And yeah, bye bye Brad Wilcox. Brad Wilcox was
That's
released
major.
from
Mm.
the young men's presidency because maybe it was a few conferences ago he was released, and we all thought, okay, this is backlash for his "why didn't the blacks get the priesthood" comments,
Mm.
right? Why didn't the whites get it until 1830? You know, that whole thing that he did.
Mm.
But no, he failed
Well done to him.
upwards, and he became first counselor in the Young Men's General Presidency. But now he's gone, and
And Lund, who
he
was
was the
just as
general officer,
cuckoo.
and Lund is gone also. But he was a general officer of the church, right? And
Mm.
so he wasn't paid, as far as I can tell. He
No.
wasn't paid, and so he's gone back to his BYU teaching job, which he was in throughout. So
Mhm.
he'll just be focused on that now. Bye bye, Brad
And teaching
Wilcox.
sex ed to the young teenagers of Utah
Mm.
in their public
I don't know if
schools,
he's
as
got that
people in
gig
the comments
anymore.
have pointed out.
I know he used to have that gig, but I don't know if he still has it.
Mm.
And then can we talk about just how uncomfortable Jared B. Larson looked giving the auditing statement? I couldn't detect any changes from the last auditing statement that was given. I think it's
Mm.
exactly the same thing that
Mm.
was said last time, but he looked particularly uncomfortable delivering it. Now, it might just be that
Maybe
Jared B.
he's
Larson doesn't like speaking publicly. It could be any of that sort of thing, but imagine now everyone knowing what they know about the way the church behaves with its finances.
yeah.
Imagine knowing now, as everyone else does,
Mm.
or some people do certainly, about the SEC fines that the church received for hiding its money, not just from the public, but from members by creating 13 limited liability companies that were cloned off of one limited liability company so that people didn't realize how much money the church actually had, right? Blatant, flagrant dishonesty and illegal behavior as admitted to by the church. Knowing that, having
Maybe
to
he's
stand
getting
up
a
there and
conscience.
going, well,
Mm.
so we're an auditing group and we say that everything is being done as we say it should be done. So that should provide, quote, reasonable assurances.
He's perjuring his soul and he knows
Yeah.
it. you know, even he can't hide it on his face, I'm sure. Bless him. Poor thing.
So,
But the church is following its own rules about how to do finances. So that's great. Thank you for
mhm.
confirming that for us. Very
Yeah.
helpful.
So,
The new 70 presidency member, Kevin
mhm.
R. Duncan, is
Oh yes, please.
a
Yeah.
taxation lawyer, a
Oh, good.
tax attorney.
Oh,
So
good.
he's
Yeah.
helpful with the auditing scandals at some point.
Perfect. Nice to know the sort of men that are still running the church. Uh, we want to play a quick game with everyone. Where's Jim? Jim Bennett,
Never see him.
who some of you may know, sings in the Tabernacle Choir, and he doesn't often get much face time in the Tabernacle Choir. So just you can see on the right
Oh,
hand
there
side
he
there,
is.
just kind of half of his
It's a
face.
demi Jim.
Um, I think that's about as
Eric the
most
half a Jim.
of Jim as has been on a broadcast of General Conference. So hopefully the cameraman will sort it out and we'll get a full shot of Jim singing with the choir, because Jim's great. And Jim helped me
Aw.
sing with the choir recently. And if you haven't seen that video, you should check that out. I had a great time, even if one person wasn't too happy to see me there. But great to see Jim Bennett still singing with the choir and singing in
Absolutely.
conference and getting half a
His,
face worth of airtime there. Should we get on to
his
what really
Inside
matters,
Edge
Peter?
podcast is brilliant. Nothing could matter more than Jim, but try.
Well,
Go on.
I say that not to
Answer me away.
not to disparage Jim, but to get on to the messages that our families are all hearing and that
Let's do
people
it.
wait 6 months to hear. So we had Jeffrey R.
Yeah.
Holland. I'm gonna call it right away that Jeffrey R. Holland is trying to give his Bruce R. McConkie final testimony pulpit thumper. If you listen to how he ends
Okay.
this talk, it's very
Mm,
like Jeffrey
mm,
R. Holland really going for it, which is fine.
mm,
But I'm going to load up some VTs now, which is where
mm.
I have some little video files here. Jeffrey R. Holland says in his closing testimony, he says this.
Spirit, I bear witness that in his youth, Joseph Smith saw what he said he saw and conversed with those whom he said he spoke. I testify that a humble and pure Russell M. Nelson is God's ordained and gifted prophet and seer.
Okay, so God's ordained and gifted prophet and seer, right? So that's good that we're still using that language, because that's language that was starting to kind of fall out of favor in some ways. People were just talking about him as the president of the church, but remember he has a mantle and he is responsible for being God's prophet and seeing things. And we won't talk about how Quinton or Cook went on the Church News podcast and say, "Oh, we had no idea there was going to be a pandemic," when would expect God's seer to maybe get a bit of a heads up on that. But Jeffrey R. Holland saying Joseph Smith saw who he said he saw and conversed with those with whom he said he conversed. That's why would you phrase it like that? Why
Well,
would
I
you
think it
phrase it like
seems,
that when
yeah.
there is a dominant narrative that Joseph Smith
Mm,
claimed to see the Father and the Son? That's when within Shady Woodland, Joseph saw the Son of God or the God of Love,
mm.
God the Father and the Son. How lovely was the morning is the hymn I'm trying to quote there. So is Jeffrey R. Holland, I want your opinion on this, Peter, is Jeffrey R. Holland having to say he saw who he said he saw because he knows there's multiple versions of that account and he claims to have seen different people in the different versions? Your thoughts, Peter?
Well, that's the big question, is we don't know who he saw. He got some names wrong, like the first accounts, or some of the first accounts of his vision of Moroni, he called him Nephi. So there are huge question marks over whether the first vision even happened, since there's no contemporary record whatsoever of it being mentioned at all until about 1832. And and he also claimed to see Peter, James, and John restoring the priesthood, yet one of his first presidency members later said, I don't remember anything
Mhm.
about that, when he claimed that was happening. So I did, any time these days someone makes any kind of statement about the traditional narrative of church history, it just opens a can of worms. It begs loads of questions. But of course, their job is just kind of double down on the traditional narrative
Mm.
without being too specific,
But
as
yeah,
always.
so
'Cause
Jeffrey
as
R.
soon
Holland
as he
hasn't
gets
actually doubled
specific, there's
down.
a problem.
He's not
Yeah.
doubled down on the traditional narrative anymore. He's hedged. He's kind of hedged his
Mm,
bets and gone, well, he saw who
yeah.
he said he saw and he conversed with who he said he conversed with. That's his
Mm,
testimony. So his testimony
yeah.
isn't what people were saying before, where they're like, Joseph Smith saw God the Father, the Son Jesus Christ, and he talked to them. And he asked, basically the 1838 account of the Book of Mormon. That's not what's going on here. Do you have anything else from his talk?
Yeah, a few things. So right at the beginning, he said, for Jesus's church and message to survive, he had to cram a lot into the heads of 12 people who he sort of only knew for like 24 months or something, in order to kind of carry on the religion. And it just really struck me at that point, no mention of the women. It's 12 men he's talking about, that they are the guardians of the religion. Yet there's so much in the New Testament where women were witnesses of Jesus Christ's life, his mother, the Marys, all these other people. And in the New Testament letters, Paul regularly references women as being prophetesses, and also as being kind of key movers and shakers in the growth and security of early Christianity. So it's just one of those standard little kind of things that wouldn't seem weird to the usual Mormon brain. But when you become more feminist and aware, you just see how much gets left out about women's significance at any point in the scriptures or the foundation of the church. He talked about Jesus focusing on following little children as an example. And he said a weird thing. He said, I don't know what prompted all that. And it's like, well, we know you taught us since primary. It was just a weird thing to say. He then said, was it their purity, innocence, and humility? It's like, well, of course it was. I just don't get this new sort of default phrase of the 12 apostles claiming not to know things. It just seemed like a completely unnecessary example, after we know nothing about Heavenly Mother. Sorry about that. But it just felt a bit odd. Then he talked about
Can I pull something out
vanity.
here real
Yeah,
quick
go on.
about
Yeah,
vanity?
yeah.
Um,
Mm,
he said something to the effect of vanity characterized the great and spacious building, which is spiritually dead. And I can't help but think what there's vanity in the Fairview, Texas debacle. There's vanity in wanting your temple to be 172 feet tall. There's vanity in that. And if vanity brings spiritual death to great and spacious buildings, I don't know how he can square that in his head with the church's desire to build massive buildings that are certain heights for
mm.
reasons that I can only seem to think are related to vanity, because there is no spiritual or theological justification for the size of those buildings. There's
Well,
the
it was,
and
yeah.
particularly in terms of their height. I believe we had a temple in Guatemala recently announced that shows that a steeple isn't necessary. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, they're just so oblivious to the potential hypocrisies here. He's standing at the ultimate ramiantum on earth, the general conference pulpit, and he's talking about the hypocrisy of the Zoramites puffed up in the vain things of the world and in their prideful prayers. And, the great and spacious building stuff, well, he's in one, like literally, with the conference center, as well as we know, all this faff about temples having to have enormous spires if that's what they want to get away with in some locations where they've got a chance of bullying a local council into bending their planning rules. It's just open targets. So they're giving open goals to people who are concerned, and there will be some themes later on. Well, he started to talk. He quoted um, Richard L. Evans, who used to be an apostle and for a long time was the kind of the voice of music and the spoken word. And I tried to find the quote, but it didn't seem to be in a general conference talk. It might have been, but if he was music and the spoken word speaker, he could have said all kinds of things thousands of times. But the basis of the quotes that Jeffrey Holland quoted was that many of us profess to be Christians, but in reality, that we're not doing the things, we're not doing the Christ-like stuff, we're not really caring for other people, and all of that stuff. And again, listen to yourself,
Mhm.
people, you know, because this is the major reason so many people are disillusioned. And they kept referencing, how do you cope with losing faith and your children leaving and that sort of thing. And it's because, very simply, this church too often is not practicing what it preaches. It's not being Christ-like, and there are so
Mm.
many examples of it. So, you know, but it's hard if every time they open their mouths, they've already got a very limited range of things they can even say. They can't condemn the occult and Ouija boards and stuff like they used to, because we now know Joseph Smith was up to his eyeballs in it. There's so many other, they can't, it's very difficult to talk about race relations or prejudice because there's so much baggage there. They've got all these topics that you know, again, it's like, as soon as you mention that, there's a lot of people who have decided you guys are not living up to what you're preaching, and they become, you know, a target for that. He then went on to give the sort of heartwarming case of Easton, who's a disabled boy,
Yeah.
and his desire to serve the blessing, to pass the sacrament when he got ordained without help. And it was all full on Dickensian Tiny Tim stuff, bless his heart. And the quote, his family does not talk about what awaits him after that, you know, after he became permanently in a wheelchair. So it's kind of a hint that he's got some horribly terminal condition.
Well, I mean,
Um,
he's got congenital muscular dystrophy. Muscular dystrophy will
yeah,
kill you. It's as
which is
simple
going
as
to be
that.
tough.
It
Yeah,
will kill him. So
yeah. And something I'd
they
sort of,
should
we've
treat kids with
up
it.
over and over, yeah, we've picked up over and over again in previous conferences, that in lieu of having something really genuinely powerful to say or miracles to point to, there's either the General Conference death march where people have the faith not to be healed and die, and here we've got another person heading that way. Um, but it's just, there was a lot of wallowing in him. You know, it's obviously meant to be heartrending and, oh, poor little kid, oh, he's being so brave, and something horrible's going to happen to him. But there was no punchline of what Jesus and the Book of Mormon promised should follow the followers of Christ, which is, so I popped over and I healed him because I'm an apostle of Jesus. I blessed him and miraculously healed him like all the apostles and prophets in the Bible would.
Mm.
None of that. And they just don't get that there's this glaring omission. They keep claiming to be the same. We're the same as the early day apostles. But they're just, instead of being able to tell a real story of genuine miraculous power and intervention, and of course we went over and healed them, because that's what apostles of Jesus are meant to be able to do. It's a replacement, it's a surrogate emotional, spiritual tug that you just tell a tragic story. And in our
Mm.
love and care and empathy for Eastern, we feel something, and therefore we felt something at conference. But that's just normal human compassion. There's nothing unique to the gospel about that.
Sure.
And it's these, once you become aware of it, you just keep seeing these tactics of avoiding what should be the real thing that they should be offering by segueing to something that isn't unique to
Mm.
Mormonism, that isn't special and isn't beyond coincidence when it comes to miracles. So it was just another really strong I was sort of had my radar up, you know,
Mm.
looking out for this, and boom, straight there in the first session.
Straight in there.
Yep.
The final thing I want to say about Holland is that he
Mm.
gave Jesus 5 square quotes straight away. So he
Oh,
put Jesus right
good for
on
him.
the forefoot,
Yeah.
which was good. And
Yep.
then we've got Camille and Johnson, who didn't do what a lot of sisters feel they need to do. A lot of the
Mm.
sisters feel they need to quote Russell M. Nelson a lot, but she didn't quote him at all. She quoted Jesus 8 times,
Mm. Yeah.
um, which is,
To be honest, her talk was totally boring, but in the nicest possible way, because she was teaching
she just
basic
kept talking about being
Christianity.
whole, and I was like, okay, being
Yeah.
whole from sort of what? Was sort of
Mm.
question. She talked about the
It's
power of
very
the
vague.
virgins. She said they're not wicked,
Mm.
they're just foolish, which I guess is kind of an attempt to not demonize people. She
Mm.
did, however, give a call out to what Dallin H. Oakes said, which is "He is risen." He wanted people to start saying that, and so she gave a little "He is risen" at the end, seemingly in response to Dallin H. Oakes' challenge at the beginning. Um,
Yeah.
and then she said this line:
Mm.
"Many are called, but few choose to be chosen. I'm still
Mhm.
trying to work out what that means. What do you think that means, Peter?
It's interesting, isn't it? It's a twist on D&C 121, is it? I don't know. Many are called, but few are chosen. And why are they not chosen? Because they don't realize that you actually have to live it to have power, you know. Um, in a way, I really like that because it's again about um, uh, you have to step up personally. You have to choose to actually have integrity and to live the gospel if you're going to, you know, have authority and power. Um, it leans towards the idea of priest authority being something that accrues on you like the Jews of heaven, which is through righteousness and through
Mhm.
having a good heart, which is one of the major messages of D&C 121, rather than being simply because you received a priesthood ordination. So I like that. I like
Mhm.
that's empowering of the individual. It's saying you have to wanna, and you have to make choices to be the kind of person that Christ wants you to be.
Hmm.
And so her whole message was about kind of faith increases our hope for healing. Again,
Yeah.
it's, you know, I mean, not specific. It was about general principles and terms, but, you know, it was lovely. It's really nice to hear a good Christ-focused talk.
Yeah.
And I always like a little bit of
It
personal
was good.
empowerment and
So
democracy.
so
What were
as our
your thoughts on that
first
quote?
well, as our first sister speaking, it was pretty good.
Yeah,
It was it was
yeah.
good. It was good for them to kind of step up
Mm.
and to, really show what this conference should be about, particularly at Easter time, which is talking about Jesus and quoting Jesus and teaching the words of Jesus and talking about one of Jesus'
Mm.
parables. And yeah, I think I don't think there is much more to say, not because it was a bad talk, but because it was just what it ought to have been. Um,
Mm. Yeah.
and unfortunately, there's a lot more to say about some of the things that weren't as good.
Mm.
Like this chap, Ronald A. Rasband,
Woohoo!
who
Here we go.
seems to have kind of jumped on the church is
Hope
growing
I got
train,
that. Mm.
um, which I
This
mean,
was fascinating. Yeah.
it's like everything he said is true in a sense, but the overall message isn't. And
Yeah.
I don't know how to
Mm.
explain that other than okay,
Yeah.
there are 80,000 missionaries.
Mm.
But why are
Oh,
there
there's so
80,000
much left out.
missionaries?
Yeah.
There was a lot because missionaries didn't go out during COVID, so there was a boom of
Mm.
missionaries, and that will shrink.
Mm.
Just I think as
Yeah.
when we saw the age drop for sister missionaries down to 19, then it kind of
I think we do need to dive in a little bit to be specific about what he said, just because
oh
we're
I've got the numbers.
basically, this seems to be like a trying to revive Thomas Monson's whole idea of hastening the work. So he
Hmm.
said hasten the work a lot. And he's basically cheerleading. He's saying everything's going fine. The church is growing like topsy, numerically. You know, he's being really specific, including some numbers. Um, and the problem is, it's all complete BS. Because, yes, in some way, you can look at some of the data like this, but only if you can only be excited if you completely ignore the catastrophic scale of failure. That yes, you can baptize all these people, but 80% of converts to our church now leave within the first 2 years.
Mm,
You can talk about huge numbers of being enrolled in seminary and institute in unprecedented numbers, but 80% of those young people will leave the church by the time they are 25.
hmm
So it's just telling this half of the story while missing out the big other half that actually is a catastrophic message of failure and falling. So
Well,
this was
should we
just
hear what
gaslighting on gas.
let's
It's
hear, let's hear
amazing.
what Razban had to say.
Yeah.
1834 in Kirtland, Ohio, the prophet Joseph Smith gathered all who held the priesthood into a little schoolhouse about 14 feet square. We could fit dozens of those schoolhouses in this conference center with room to spare. Joseph Smith said, "It is only a little handful of priesthood you see here tonight, but this church will fill North and South America. It will fill the world." That prophecy is being fulfilled right before our eyes. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is growing in members and families, missions and missionaries, meeting houses and temples, and in enrollment in our seminaries, institutes, and universities all around the world. We are grateful to be on the earth when the church is increasing in numbers and influence, but more importantly, in the hearts and lives of its members.
I wanted to kiss his face when he said that, because I've been having a massive row with someone who shall remain anonymous, but maybe my brother who's a bishop, where he is. I've been doing my thing saying the church is collapsing, and that it's not what we were promised when we were kids, that the church was meant to fill the world, the prophecy of Daniel, the stone rolling forth and filling the earth. And he's, whoever he is, may have totally bought into this new narrative that actually we're only meant to be a tiny remnant, and started quoting Second Nephi about that, which Quentin Cook, I think it was, who kicked off the ball rolling for this being the great excuse now. We're only meant to be a tiny number in the world in the last days, and totally flipping that script. So to have Raspant in this general conference absolutely double down on, we are growing numerically. This church is meant to fill, and I think in normal minds that means fill numerically North and South America and go on to fill the world, which it should be. If this church, as you know, this is one of my trigger points. If this
Well,
church is what it claims to be and has all these advantages over other Christians, of course they should all be losing their congregations, but we shouldn't. We should be rolling forth and hoovering them up. We've got all these extra things that the whole point is we're saving Christianity. We're meant to be the next global religion. And he's pretending it is, but it just isn't. So this was a really fascinating example of the endless contradictions between apostles, which is going to be the theme of my next episode. It's just the blatant contrasting messages, and members are meant to have all these contradictions rattling around in their heads. The church is increasing in numbers and influence,
Well,
as
he
we
gave some
heard.
specifics for that. So he said
Yeah,
308,000 new members.
yeah.
So I got a few questions there. How many of those are,
Mm,
children of record? How many of those are
yeah,
actually baptized
that's interesting.
8-year-olds? How many of those are
Yeah,
converts? You know,
yeah.
when he says in 2024 there's 80,000 missionaries and 308,000 new members, that putting those two together, I think, is meant to sort of show that it's 308,000 converts.
Mm,
But I don't know if
mm,
that's the case or not. If there's
yeah.
anyone that's able to fact check that
But
on the
either
hoops,
way,
let's go
where
for it.
are all the new wards? So we know that
Exactly, Peter.
that
Where
this
are
is
the new
flatlining.
wards? They're closing
They are playing
stakes.
they are playing numerical games to split stakes
Mhm,
into smaller ones, that don't actually represent real growth,
mhm.
because they've been desperate to keep the number of stakes created somehow in the plus. I think I sent you, one of our listeners sent a screenshot of the Church News's feed into social
Mhm.
media with graphs, and they've got this graph showing the growth
Before we go to the
just
graph,
from, yeah,
we need to
but they've
acknowledge
started
that.
in the 1800s.
Mhm. We need to
Sorry, go on.
acknowledge that Rade Razband wins the PBK award because he
Yeah,
mentioned Russell M. Nelson. He quoted him 6
yeah.
times. It's more than
And I
anyone
think he
else
was the
in
winner
this session.
last time as well. I was
He
listening to our closing session.
he wins. His crown is strong and firmly affixed atop his head. He also described
Yeah.
people like you and me as mere footnotes, so that's
Yes.
pleasant. So
Yeah.
if we are mere footnotes, then that's fine, I guess. Then we talked about the
As
church
in all
growth,
the
and
other voices. Yeah.
then we have the graph.
So,
Um,
so the graphs here are that
yeah,
they're not recent. The actual recent years is like 1 millimeter wide to hide the fact that they're literally horizontal now. It's practically flatlining, and you can see that the trajectory from when we were younger should have been literally, they should have had twice as many members of the church by now. If that angle going upwards, from the 80s into the 90s had continued, where a lot of these bits would be now is almost twice as much, twice as many stakes, twice as many members. But since the internet, dropped all the truth bombs or carpet truth bombs the church, it has crashed. And with all the shenanigans they can deploy, and they still, we are reaching the tipping point where even with their false data or their misleading data, um, the baseline stats are going to have to start coming down.
Ruth makes a good
When we
point
know
here.
that, yeah,
That the truth is always in the footnotes.
yeah,
So don't worry, folks,
mm,
about being mere footnotes. That's often where the truth
yeah.
is found, as we know. Like in the
And the
Gospel
idea,
Topics essays.
yeah, he quoted Melvin J. Ballard saying that in South America, sorry, the church will go slowly but powerfully, and
Mhm,
that is now being fulfilled across the continent. That's not what happened. The church grew like topsy. Like when I was on my mission, it was Latin America was the place to be because you'd
mhm,
baptize whole villages. So it grew super fast numerically, but in reality, most of those were baseball baptism type things, and only about 2% were active. And Holland's had to go and close down stakes. So that isn't actually what happened in South America.
mm,
Numerically, it booms. Maybe now it's a little bit more stable, whatever they've got going on. And he said the growth was happening across that continent and the Isles of the Sea. It's definitely not happening in our Isle of the Sea. He also mentioned the 36 new missions.
mhm.
Now, this is another
Aren't
of their great
new,
cons,
because
which
I
they're
believe
not
one of them
new.
you served in, Peter, and then they
It's
closed,
the
and then they
resurrected
reopened.
zombie of my mission. The Florida Talos mission got closed a few years ago. Then they built a temple in it, of course, which is the final death knell. But then they reopened 35 or 6 missions, but they were all within existing mission areas or those that have been closed. And that just show not in new territories, our point being,
Mhm,
which shows there isn't real growth. And they know it. And they know that this temporary post-COVID boom in missionary numbers, which were steadily falling before COVID, is highly unlikely to be sustained. So they have not opened new missionaries because they know that in a few years' time, there will not be the missionaries to support them. So there's no point opening up new territories. So to stand there and say these are new missions is again all part of the propaganda lies
mhm.
that he was pumping out.
And they're also
Um,
using temples
mm,
as a growth
yeah.
metric, which
Yes.
temples have got nothing to do with how many members of the church you
Mm,
have and everything to do with how much money you have.
yeah.
Because
And there are other
we have
growth. Oh, go on.
so we have
Yeah.
temples in the UK, for example, that are barely staffed at the moment,
Mm,
and you're having American missionaries come over and having to staff them. The locals aren't really staffing them. London's virtually empty a lot of the time. Saturdays it gets a little bit busy.
mm,
Temples are becoming by appointment only in the UK where they weren't before. We're building more temples here that we know just sort of intuitively from what we know about the stakes nearby that they're not going to be very well manned and they're going to be open evenings only and weekends. So
mm,
temples are not an indicator of growth, particularly when Russell M. Nelson can act like Oprah Winfrey and just say, "You get a temple, you get a temple, you get a temple, you all get a temple." When the church has the amount of money that they have, all the temples are is an indicator of the church's financial growth. Nothing to do with
mm,
their growth in the hearts of its members, as Razban tried to say. Your
yeah.
final thoughts on this before we move on, Peter?
Yeah, well, the other indicator growth they're trying to go with is seminary and institute enrollment,
Hmm.
which is fascinating, and also how many people. I mean, the Brigham Young universities have shamefully pumped about 20% of all of everyone's tithing into three or four universities within the United States of America that teaches 90% white middle class Americans. Um, so in shame, hopefully they've finally started putting on more resources online with the Pathways program to kind of help people anyway get educated through their resources. So they're pushing the idea that there's now 75,000 people on BYU's pathway, a third of them in Africa. Why not build an actual museum um, university in Africa? And for helping people to have a better life. Um, but again, yes, you might be enrolling record numbers of youth in seminary and institute. That doesn't mean they're going to go. You've already dumbed it down. So they don't actually have to study much to graduate. That was one of the innovations of Lund a year or two ago in the Young Men General Presidency and the Seminary Institute leadership. So all you have to do is attend, and you kind of graduate in batches, and you decide how much of the scriptures you're going to actually read. So it's not exactly demanding now. And also, 80% of those young people will still leave the church by age 25, and it will be more by the time the current seminary students do on current trends. So it's all hollow nonsense.
Right.
It's just really sad.
Let's move
Yeah.
on to the final VT that we've got for Razband,
Mm.
which is just. I think
Mm.
this is the place where many people go when they discover issues with the church or when they struggle with
Yeah.
matters of church history or any of those sorts of things.
Mm.
It's Jesus is the answer, right? Okay, let's just make it about Jesus.
Recognize that in the midst of good news of the gospel, there are those who struggle, who have faith challenges, doubts, and questions that seem to have no answers.
That's great. Okay. Thank you for acknowledging that. Thank you for acknowledging those people exist.
Yeah.
That's cool. Awesome. Thank you for
Questions
acknowledging.
with no
Brothers and
answers.
sisters, Jesus Christ is the answer.
Well, no, there are just actual answers. Did Joseph Smith, have sexual relationships with women that weren't his legally married wife? That's a question that people have. There's an answer to that. Just going, oh, well, Jesus is the answer to that. No. And the reason I say he's going to think that has no answer is because the church has, through people like Fair Mormon, often backed itself into the position of, well, there is no answer. We can't really know because it's murky and it's history and the sources are unreliable and this and that. Because the way they have to obfuscate to try and create some sort of plausible deniability that these things that trouble people so deeply ever actually happened. These things that we weren't told about ever actually happened. And so Razban's just going to hand wave and go, Jesus is the answer. Jesus is the answer to did Joseph Smith do these things? Jesus is the answer to did Brigham Young institute a very racist system into the church that lasted over 100 years before it was finally repealed in 1978? Did God allow the church to go astray like that?
Jesus.
Jesus is the answer. Well, hang on. Jesus is meant to be speaking to these people because these people claim to speak for God. Russell
It's
and
an
Nelson, I don't
amazing
have the
thing.
clip, but the clip's there.
This is
I've put it in
this is
plenty of
their
videos.
default excuse now. Loads of them are saying this, and they're saying, well, and it's the same argument as Corbridge and others are putting forth about the primary questions and the beta and the zeta questions. That ultimately, as long as you believe in Jesus and have faith, that's the important thing. Everything else is negotiable or doesn't matter as much. Now, again, I feel so strongly like the importance of people, particularly my age, to witness for the fact that this is not Mormonism. This is, or not the Mormonism we grew up with. Obviously, it evolves with each generation. Saying Jesus is the answer would have jarred everyone's ears. It would have sounded like the stupid born agains, the evangelicals. It would have been like, oh, what airhead nonsense to just say Jesus is the answer.
Well, it
The
sounds
answer
almost
would
like
be
through
you
grace you'll be saved and not through works, which the church has been teaching
exactly.
us for years that no, you have to get on the
No,
covenant path, you have to do the right things,
yeah.
you got to learn the right
Mm,
bits of information in order to
yeah.
be saved.
Well, the answer back in the day would have been the apostles are the answer. You go to them. They have the answer. They will tell you. They will tell you exactly what the answer is. And if they don't know it, they will pray and ask for a revelation and they'll tell you. And you can look it up in Mormon doctrine and all these other encyclopedic books of doctrine and answers, which have now been quietly dropped because they're mostly inaccurate or never were representative of church doctrine in the first place. So yeah, it's fascinating. Although he's saying, don't miss the majesty of this moment, hurrah for Israel, we're doing so well. Why, in a sense, he's saying, why is everyone looking so miserable? Haven't you noticed? We're doing great. It's all fine. What we're saying, and so many people are saying, is don't miss the tragic calamity of the moment. This is the moment where the church crashes and burns. It's already happening. And if you general authorities can't even begin to be realistic about that, you need to be replaced fast because you've all got these business management graduate things, but you can't even do that well because the board would have fired you by now. Fundamental business management is how to get rid of failing leaders who are losing their customers. That should be game over by now. They should all have been replaced. And there
Now
is a mechanism for doing that in the Doctrine and Covenants. We
there
vote
is.
opposed and change them, and
We've
they
gone
listen
through
to the
that.
people. Yeah.
But
So
I
it's
want to make a quick point,
amazing contrast to reality. Yeah.
which is I do appreciate this idea that Jesus is the answer. I
Mm,
appreciate it from a theological perspective. I
mm,
appreciate when people like Patrick Kieran move towards a more grace-based sort of theology. I appreciate that. That for a long time for me was the place I wanted to be. And I've been on a real journey with my personal beliefs, and I don't
mm,
talk about them publicly. I've started to talk about them a bit more
mm,
openly, but don't
mm,
famously talk about my personal beliefs publicly. Um, and that leaves it open to interpretation for people to say what they think I believe, or that I do believe, or I don't believe, etc., etc. But it's a complicated journey when you learn these things
mm,
about when you lose trust in the institution that you trusted.
mm,
It can drop you off and go, all right, well, I'm just going to drop the whole religion thing altogether, and then you can catch yourself and go, well, no, okay, what parts of this religion can I keep
mm,
hold of, and what things do I still believe in, what do I still believe about Jesus Christ, and all those sorts of things. And it ebbs and flows, and so it's not a direct line for anyone,
no,
and
no.
you will go uh you'll go, oh, I don't believe one day, and then you'll believe the next day. And I think there are people still in this faith who are the same, who, if you froze time and asked people honestly in a sacrament meeting, what do you believe, you get a variety of answers. um and the problem is those people often don't stick around, because you can't just say Jesus is the answer to questions that do have actual answers and that we should be able to get to the bottom of. There are places where you can say, well, Jesus is the answer, and I get that. But this isn't
Mm,
one of them, because these things that he's clearly alluding to, the things that people struggle with, are things that
mm.
do have answers, or certainly that we should be talking about more. So, yeah,
And
that's,
he said, "Seek learning and education."
yeah.
It's contradictory to the rest of his talk, which was about this should be the religion of the rational faith, the educated.
Hmm.
You can't fob off people who've sought learning and education with Jesus is the answer.
Yeah.
As you're saying, it's such
Particularly for
a,
people whose belief in Jesus
yeah.
Christ can be very complicated.
Mm. But also,
As
both of us face the challenge because we grew up in the church of the only reason we even
Mhm.
knew about Jesus in the first place was because this church taught it to us. So the
Yeah.
whole paradigm we've had of religion and God, especially in a country that's mostly secular, has been through the lens of Mormonism. So what's left when you realize they lied about some really fundamental things?
Mm.
Why would you trust anything they said about Jesus? Why would you put it in a different box? Why would cutting off all the controversial Mormon bits and holding on to Jesus as the answer be the answer for Mormons? It can't be, because they've always been entangled.
Mhm.
And that's the naivety and foolishness of what they're offering as this useless solution. And the more we study Jesus, Jesus is the answer. Jesus is example of battling corrupt power systems and corrupt religion.
Yes, the
It's all
loyal
about their
opposition,
own
Peter.
authority. The loyal opposition, that's Jesus. Yes, he is the answer. He's always been the answer. I agree. Love and compassion for people over systems,
Yeah.
kindness over obedience is not their religion, but it
Well,
is Jesus's,
you want
and
to talk
I
about
agree
someone who
it's the
didn't
answer.
focus on Christ
Oh, God.
at all, was Quinton L. Cook. He said in the talk, during this Easter season, our focus is on Christ. In
Mm,
his entire talk, he didn't really quote Jesus. He didn't quote Jesus once. He kind of made some
mm,
references to Jesus towards the end.
mm,
Brigham Young, James E. Fowles, Gordon B. Hinckley, Russell M. Nelson. Those are the people he did quote, right? And some people
mm.
from the William Martin Hancock companies. The talk wasn't particularly Christ-centered at all.
Yeah.
at
He was,
all.
I mean, he's the historian. In a sense, they each have their tropes and their roles. So he will
Mhm,
always be the person who wallows in pioneer history with his ancestor Heber C. Kimball,
mhm,
just as he did when he came to the British Rescue a few years ago here, and just went on and on about church history and
mhm,
didn't address any of the current contemporary issues that he'd said he was going to. He just got
mhm.
lost in his usual spiel, boasting about his pioneer ancestors. So we have the standards. His launch point was the Casper, Wyoming temple dedication,
Yes.
which was kind of on the old pioneer trail. And he talked about, I mean, he's picked up a few little accuracies, like he mentioned that the handcart pioneers who ended up dying in the snow had been warned not to. But as we know, that was
And
overridden by
those weird
Jesus
comments
is
about
the
like, "Oh,
answer.
I had to remember that most of the people didn't suffer." And I
Yes,
was waiting for that,
most
and
of them didn't
therefore
die.
what? Like, and what's that meant to tell
Some of
us?
them didn't die.
I couldn't quite work out the point. I don't want to spend too much time on this
No, no,
talk, to be
no,
honest with
that's
you.
fine. Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
Other he admitted that David Patton Kimball was his great grandfather, which is fine.
Mm.
Um,
All that is unfair about life can be made right through the atonement of Christ. So
yeah.
his version of Jesus is the answer was that Christ's atonement just fixes everything. He
Mhm,
had three bits of advice for everyone. One, don't underestimate the difference that we can make in other people's lives. Two was kind of toxic positivity. Exhibit joy and happiness even while you are suffering, and the sunny side of the street. And he pay tribute to his wife, who's kind of got that kind of a personality.
mhm,
So stay positive and cheerful; it'd be fine. Um, and take time to contemplate the atonements. And he said kind of a thing that struck me as a bit weird, where he said that, one of the ways to contemplate the atonement is to go to the temple regularly. Um, and there you will experience continual remembrance of the Saviour's atonement and what it overcomes. I'm like, no, it doesn't. It's Masonic cosplay, dude. I know they've tried to Jesusify the endowment, but you don't go there and get long analysis of Christ's atonement and what it overcomes.
Well, yeah, no, you
I mean,
certainly.
the overcomes bit is, wealth and money and power is the bad thing, but they're making this up. That's not what you actually hear when you
I
go to the endowment. It's about other things.
I've softened my
Yeah.
rhetoric over time. I'm trying to be more.
Mm,
I'm trying. I'm trying to be kinder,
mm,
and less sort of cynical and haughty or whatever words you might use.
mm,
So I'm not going to go with Masonic cosplay, but I
okay,
am going to agree with the broader point that
mm,
the temple, as far as I understood it wasn't about the atonement particularly. It was about
mm.
making promises under certain penalties, and if you keep those promises, that is your way to exaltation.
Yeah. And some
Um,
good meaty doctrine about the why everything exists, why the earth was created, what the purpose of our life is, the fall and things like that, but not much focus on Jesus,
yeah.
certainly not specifically. I
So,
just want to say one final thing. When I was reviewing
oh, can
last
I allow it?
conference, Um,
I'll allow it.
someone quoted the idea of preparing a people, and I
Mhm.
pointed out that's really risky because these prepper groups have been called preparing a people, and that's a dog whistle phrase for them. And at a time when we're now getting the actual convictions for murder of some of these Mormon prepper types, for him Cook to say, to quote President Nelson again about preparing a people who'll prepare the world for the return of the Lord. They're again just throwing meat to these people who are convinced that there are all these secret messages and what President Nelson says every time, that basically the second coming's tomorrow and we should all leave the city and go and live in the hills and get guns. Um, so again, it's all about context, isn't it? He's probably completely oblivious to the significance of that. He would have no idea probably that there are really dangerous prepper people all over Utah and Idaho, um, who call themselves that and are trying to do it for real. And yeah, it just triggered me a little bit
Mhm.
that he used that phrase again, and they don't realize how dangerous it can be.
Okay. Well, let's
All
soothe
right,
your
Ricardo
ruffled feathers with Ricardo B. Jimenez, which
from Chile.
I couldn't find the accent on my keyboard, so I apologize that I have not put the correct accent on his name.
Jimenez. Yeah.
But I couldn't
He
quite get it to
is
work on Google Slides. He's a
an
General Authority
MBA.
70.
No,
He's a
he's an MBA who works in the mining industry.
Oh, okay, wonderful. Right. So he's another Masters of Business. He's a General Authority 70, second counsel in the North America Central Area Presidency, and he works currently at church headquarters as for the priesthood and family department. So he came up with the catchphrase. He repeated it a few times. Covenantal connection to Jesus Christ. So this idea that covenants bind us to Jesus Christ, and the theme of his talk really was that covenants bind us to Jesus Christ, and that's why the church is important, because you can't get to Jesus Christ really without the church,
The institutional church. Yeah.
without the institutional church. He
And I loved it because he started out, the motivation here is pure, I think. He's saying, we can get lost in activities, in traditions, in goal setting, which I was quite interested to hear him talk about as potentially
Mhm.
negative, and checking boxes. But he was saying, really we need to understand why. Why is it we do any of these things? There should be a higher purpose, which I love. Of
Mhm.
course there should. What a nice thing to say. And in a globalized world, there are many voices
Well, I've got that quote,
saying
Peter. Can
things
I play
like,
it?
yeah, go for it. Yeah.
Because I think we should just hear it straight from the horse's mouth, as it were.
World, many voices will try to influence you and, if possible, lead you to believe that some fundamental truths of the restored gospel of Jesus Christ are unnecessary, starting with the essential truth of the need for a restoration in these the last days, including the necessity of having God's kingdom on earth represented by the restored Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. You may hear voices insistent that only a personal relationship or understanding with the Savior is sufficient, and that religion or the restored church is unnecessary or non-essential. I invite you to be slow to consider or even be immune to being influenced by these misleading ideas.
Yeah.
Be immune to these misleading ideas that you can do without the institutional church, and it's enough to have a personal relationship with God. It
But
seems so
then
old school,
you've got
doesn't it? It seems
Razban
old battle.
saying, well,
Yeah.
it's just all about Jesus.
Yeah. Think Jesus is the answer, not the
Jesus
church.
is the answer, not the church, because these issues. Well, I'm not really saying not the church, but what Razban's saying is, when there's
Yeah.
these challenges which inevitably involve the institutional church and its
Yeah.
behavior, don't think about the church, just focus on Jesus. But then
Jesus is enough.
Jimenez
Enough.
says, but
Mm,
actually, no, you can't just have Jesus. You do also need this church,
mm.
because that's misleading, and you should immunize yourself against those ideas. Which is it?
And so the roller coaster continues back and forth, up
Mm,
and down, everything all at once
yeah.
in a sort of endless loop of repetition and contradiction.
Mm.
Um, and
But
yeah, and the quotes: covenantal connection, covenantal love.
Mhm.
I love the Savior, and my love for Him is my why. So again,
Because he who has a
finished off.
why can withstand
This is
any
all about Jesus.
how,
Yeah.
as they say.
Mhm.
So it's all about Jesus and Jesus.
Oh,
So it's a bit confused. It's like it's all about Jesus, but Jesus isn't enough. You also still need us. It's
mm,
well, I thought
doesn't work.
this is where I would say to my bishop, and people can debate me on this, but
Mm,
I would say that this idea that if you don't sustain the first presidency in Quorum of the 12, you can't go to the temple, is putting them between you and Jesus, you and your highest worship. The whole point of the plan of salvation was that Jesus said, no, I will go, I will make the sacrifice, and then people will come to you through me. I will walk alongside them and bring them to the Father, right? Satan said, no, 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 I will stand between these people. They will have to do what I say, and I will get all the glory. And it seemed to be the fact that he wanted all the glory that was the problem, but that's by the by. What they're doing is they're doing what Satan suggested by saying, no, 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 you have to go through us. Jesus was the one that we were meant to go through. And he was meant to walk alongside us. But now you have to sustain us in order to receive exaltation. You have to go through
mm,
us. And that seems wrong to me.
mm. Yeah.
But here's Eyring for you. Here's Henry B.
Mm,
Eyring.
In
Second
fact, can I
Council in
just
the First
say that
Presidency.
before him they had a lovely song. It was something like "Sweetly Whisper All Is Love." So I presume they're feeding in some of these new hymns that they've added to the hymn book. We should just acknowledge that. If that I've not heard that one before, so I'm
Oh,
assuming it's one of the new
no,
ones.
didn't sound like a new one to
Um,
me. I
mm,
forget the name of that
mm.
one.
Yeah. You're the music expert, though.
I think I know that one. So someone tell me the
Okay.
name of that hymn in the
They do all
comments.
sound the same, though. They're a bit samey, Mormon hymns, so it could
I'm
be me.
trying to say nice things about the tab choir. I'm trying not to say
Yeah.
that
They're adorable, very
because
predictable.
I like the tab choir these days. They were very nice to me.
Mhm, mhm.
Henry B. Eyring, Earth with Her 10,000 Flowers. Yes, Doug Vincent, that one. Um, that one. That hymn.
Okay.
But anyway, uh
It's not in the hymn book, is it?
yes, it
The
is,
old
and
one?
it's
Oh,
we don't need to do this live. People, I have
okay.
food to eat. Henry B. Eyring, second council and first presidency, spoke from a chair. He's done this past couple of times as well.
Yeah,
Now
he spoke very clearly, I
he
thought.
spoke
He
very
seemed
clearly.
much more together. That
Hmm.
normally looks like he's having several tiny strokes all the time. But I thought he actually spoke very well. He was very calm, he was confident,
Yeah.
he clear. I was like, my gosh, he might live long enough to be prophet at this rate, but who knows? But it was from the chair. Um, and and we are mortals, yet in his love for each of us, the Savior kind of invites us in. Something that struck me during this talk was that they had pictures of Jesus, and it was very, very much white Jesus, which we might have a chat about.
Hang on, it's
Um,
confirmed, Peter. Hang on. Sophia Haas
yeah.
Music and
Oh,
Andriel Hillis have said
yeah.
that the hymn is God is Love, which is definitely in the
Okay.
hymn book. I know that one.
All
I've
right.
sung it before. Anyway, yes, we are gonna let's get straight onto it. Okay, the church with their
Yeah.
race and the priesthood, race and the Church of Jesus Christ Latter-day Saints, answers to church and gospel questions, sort of essay.
This is like an
Um,
updated Race and the Priesthood essay,
it's
and
got some of
it
the
came
same
out a little
content,
while ago.
but it's
Yeah,
very
but
recent.
also
It
some
came out.
significant adjustments.
There's some extra
Um,
stuff. They're pushing back on sort of white supremacist views of Jesus Christ,
yeah,
particularly. And one of the things they
yeah.
said was, does the church teach that Jesus Christ was a white Northern European, as is sometimes depicted in church art? No, Jesus was born in Bethlehem to a Jewish woman and raised in Nazareth. It doesn't say to Jewish parents, because obviously there is the miraculous
Mhm,
conception element of that. The fact
mhm,
that some popular church artwork has portrayed Jesus as white does not mean, as some have mistakenly argued, that Jesus was white, according to a modern understanding of race. Now, it's here that they try and throw artwork under the bus in some way by saying,
mm,
just because church artworks portrayed him as white doesn't mean, as
mm,
some have mistakenly argued, that he was white. But again, I've talked about what artwork means. Church artwork is there to teach people
yeah.
things, it is there to
And
portray things. And so when they say, oh, just because
mm,
church artists didn't portray Joseph Smith as putting his head in a hat doesn't mean that he didn't. And you were wrong for thinking that that's how it happened just because that's how it was portrayed in artwork. Well, actually, artwork informs our understanding of the gospel. It's used to teach. Children are
mm,
taught from the church art library in primary. So it's interesting then that after this has just come out, Peter sent
yes,
these
he is
pictures.
lecturing the architecture about art.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, not lecturing you, I'm lecturing the audience. Here's what we've got pictures of from
Yay,
conference.
white
They're showing
Jesus!
white
So
Jesus again.
during Henry's talk, I couldn't tell if that's an angel moving the stone or Jesus, but they dwelt on it for a very long time. So I'm
Hmm.
assuming that's kind
But
of
either
meant to
way,
be
here's white Jesus.
Jesus.
And
He looks like he's from Provo. Yeah.
what's interesting about white Scandinavian Jesus
Yeah.
is that when they say no, Jesus wasn't white, and just because church art shows it doesn't mean that he was white. If they're going to take the position of, well, church artwork's wrong, then
Mm,
stop using that church artwork and find some different artwork that portrays what
mm,
you actually want people to believe. Why aren't you using artwork that shows him to be the ethnicity that you're now saying on your website that you believe him to be? If we've moved
mm,
away from white Jesus, stop using the white Jesus artwork, I
yeah.
guess is my point there. That's kind of
And
my point.
a couple of other factors within this are that also a few years ago, President Nelson actually created an approved artwork list, like literally, the law is now in your foyer shrines at church. You have to take down literally remove images of Jesus that don't conform to the list of really boring kitsch sort of mainstream Mormon art,
El Parsons.
and they're white Jesuses. So they've actually specifically doubled down for the first time in history on what you're allowed to even show, which is very white. So that's their own fault again. But what is wonderful is in the latest church art competition, which happens every few years, a lot of LDS artists have really gone the extra to show brown Jesus as a Middle Eastern person who looks fairly ordinary rather than tall and Adonis-like. So they do have plenty of art they could be using instead, and it would have been really nice to see some of those wonderful art. You can find them online, just brilliant artwork that the grassroots members are making to depict Christ, and much more racially inclusive and diverse and so on. So they've got plenty if they wanted, and who knows if Henry was even involved in deciding which pictures would be shown here. But someone is still very fixated on white Jesus. And again, this witness from the past. Now I'm old, I'm like, back in my day, I was taught that Jesus was white, like literally as a religious thing, that he did not look Middle Eastern because his father was white God, Elohim. And I remember people who taught me as a youth kind of quoting some kind of sources from the time that claimed that Jesus kind of had red hair, was a bit blonde, and so on, and just looked different. And that was taught to us as kind of proof that he wasn't just the son of some carpenter, that Joseph was not his dad, that he had a biological father who was, of course, a white resurrected deity. So this isn't just metaphor, this isn't vague. This literally used to be taught to us as part of the whole framework of endemic racism in the church's doctrine and practice. And it's really important that we don't allow people to forget that. We've come a long way since then, which is wonderful, but don't pretend that nonsense didn't occur and that it wasn't coming out of the mouths of the
It's
prophets,
the
'cause it
church's
was.
biggest issue time and time again.
Mm,
And it's if there's one thing I could
mm,
change, it would be I guess it would be this, is that
mm,
the church will change things and it will be a positive change. To some. To
mm,
others, they might view it as a negative change, but I would view some of these things positively. And the thing they always
mm,
forget to do or don't do or miss out on doing, however you want to look at it, is then recognizing that there's been a change and
mm,
addressing how things used to be. They just don't do that. They don't
mm,
recognize it. And that creates an issue for a lot of people. You
mm,
can change the you can make the argument that the church can change, continue in revelation, etc. But I don't think it was ever meant to be the case that you then just throw everyone else behind you under the bus and say they were always wrong, or just ignore it. And
mm,
it just doesn't sound like repentance to me. If particularly if it's something that's
mm.
changed, that it was wrong and now you're correcting, just doesn't sound like repentance at all.
Yeah, and
And
that's the
so
ongoing
people leave
challenge,
the
isn't it?
church, and
Yeah.
Henry B. Eyring wanted to address
Mm,
what to do
mm,
about people
mm,
leaving the church.
Have
yeah.
loved ones who are wandering off the path to eternal life. You wonder what more you can do to bring them back. Well, one thing, you can depend on the Lord to draw closer to them as you serve Him in faith.
Mhm,
Now, there's some weird, just looking at it from a temporal point of view, to looking at
mm,
prepositions and whatnot. Um, there's a question of to whether Jesus comes to us or we go to him, and it depends which church leader you ask, and it depends which scripture you read. Isaiah's full of "my arm is stretched forth still," and this idea that Christ is there ready to
mm,
embrace us if we'll only go to him. But then you've got Patrick Kieran saying in the last conference, Christ is in relentless pursuit of you. And then you've got other people
mm,
saying, no, Christ is waiting for you to come to him. So here he's saying that if you draw closer to Christ, Christ will draw closer to the people that leave, even if they're
mm,
actively moving away from
mm,
him, or if not him, then
mm.
actively moving away from the church, because people moving away from the church is not synonymous with them moving away from Christ. So not always, anyway. I did an
Mm,
interview recently with Sandra Tanner where I asked her about this, because
mm,
She's still a Christian, and she's
Mm.
still a believer in that sense. And so I asked her
Mm.
about why she ended up in that place and not in the place that a lot of people end up in, which is atheism. So, yeah, go check
As
out that
Doug
episode of
just
Mormon
said,
Stories.
yeah, as Doug just said in the comments, if you work in the church, then Jesus will rescue your wayward family. You
That
know, this
essentially
is the
seems to be the
thing they
message
keep.
of what Irene
It's
just said. Yeah.
yeah, it's elder abuse. You know, they keep saying, and sometimes they've been much more blatant in the Ensign, and you know, we've covered this a lot in previous podcasts. They just keep saying to the parents of the kids who've gone, if you do more, pray more, fast, the miracle will happen. Honest, we promise you. And in the past, they've also got these quotes from Joseph Smith that literally and have been regularly quoted in General Conference that ultimately, if you're a sealed family, your children will ultimately come back. You will have them in the eternities. Then they get the complete contradiction of Nelson's sad heaven talk that no, they won't. If they're not saved and faithful before they die, they're gone forever. So don't kid yourself about that and thinking there'll be all these endless second chances in the next life. Total contradiction. And this is the biggest open wound for most families now. Now, so many people are leaving, especially 80% of the kids. How many parents? I mean, a lot of the parents are going with them, but of those who don't, how many of them are there many families left at all where everyone is still faithful and meeting these requirements? No, hardly anyone. So this is an open wound for everyone. And Iring is
And yeah,
sort of,
he's really
in my
pressing on the worries and fears
yeah,
of people who see
yes,
their family members leave. And he's go, oh, well, if you just double
yeah.
down, it'll fix it for
Yes,
them too.
it'll be fine, and you'll feel
And
okay.
it
You'll feel
takes me
closer
back
to
to
Jesus.
we
Yeah.
believe that man will be punished for his own sin and not for Adam's transgression. And
Mm.
similarly,
You
you
can't
can't
save
bring
people for
someone
the
else back
Adam's goodness.
to the church.
Yeah.
Yeah, the inverse
Mm,
is the same. You can't bring people back
mm,
just by your own increased work in the church. I don't get
mm.
why Iring is kind of peddling that as a solution, because it doesn't seem
Mm.
to me that it would work that way.
He seems so nice and so soft, but he's said some of the most brutal things in General Conference. His 2018 Power of Sustaining Faith talk I often
Mhm.
hark back to, where he literally taught that it's a sin to speak or even think of any leaders having human weakness, which is
Yeah.
disastrous for holding them accountable. And here he said, when you feel sorry, he was talking about, you know, how he kind of felt closest to God. And it's all about obedience. Um, you know, he was saying that it was when he needed to feel closer to God, um, you know, that it was through simple acts of obedience to the commandments, weepy quiver,
Hmm.
that I felt closer to Jesus. That's how you get cheerful, not some other sort of more positive closeness concept of
Mm.
forgiveness or whatever. It was I obey the commandments. If you obey the commandments, it'll all be good. And everyone's under the commandments to be a witness of the Savior and to care for those in need all our lives.
Hmm.
And doesn't that sound great? Well, why isn't the church caring for the needy? Why are we giving them so much money and they're not spending it on the needy? They're hoarding it. They're, you know, more and more people are talking now about the projections that the church in 15 years or so will have $1 trillion, which sounds crazy at a time with all the tariffs nightmare going on and trillions being wiped off the stock market. I mean, I wonder how much Enzyme Peak has just lost
I do wonder,
from, you know,
actually.
we've probably just lost hundreds of billions of dollars, or not hundreds, but
Hundreds
certainly
of
billions
millions,
of dollars have been wiped out after the
potentially.
church's share value. But as Jesus taught, if you'd actually done something with them in the day that you had it to do good, that would be
Mm.
secure. Those children would have been healed and saved. Those people would have been helped. And that's a done deal. That's then a witness forever after that you did the right thing with your money. But when you hoard it in the stock market, you can and then vote for a president who wants to crash it all.
Right.
Goodbye to that money. It never helped anyone.
Right, we're stopping there. We're stopping there because you mentioned the man who shall not be mentioned, because this is not a political podcast.
Yeah.
So thank you very much, everyone. I am just gonna wrap this up because it is almost time for me to get ready for the next session. Thank you very much to those who sent super chats. Susie Catherine, thank you very much. It is Jammy Dodger time indeed. These will fuel the next session of conference. And make sure you jump in and join in at the next session, which will be going live in about 2.5 hours or so. I will watch the next session. I've got Colch on as my co-host for this next session. He will be watching it with me. He will bring his notes and we'll chat again, and we'll rinse and repeat 4 more times this weekend. So if you like this and if you support this kind of work, please hit the like button, subscribe so you don't miss the next one, and hit the notification bell just in case you've got conference blindness and you don't know what the timings are anymore. But make sure to definitely tune into the next session and support this, because I'm going to be staying up very late at night putting myself through this, because I will be watching conference so you don't have to. Take care, everyone, and I'll see you soon.